to understand data, you really need to understand a domain and a vertical.
Okay, welcome back to the Marketing Playbook presented by Details Interactive. Here you'll take away 3 game-winning marketing plays every episode to take back to your team. I'm your host, Mark Friedman, and my career has been focused on direct-to-consumer marketing, direct mail, physical retail, and digital commerce. This is episode number 12, and today's guest is Fayez Mohamood. Fayez is the co-founder and CEO of Bluecore. Before we get started, a quick thank you, as always, to Max Brandstetter of the Wild Business Growth Podcast for producing this episode. You can reach him at max@hippodirect.com to help bring your podcast to life. Let's open the playbook. Ready, break. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining the Marketing Playbook Podcast. I'm your host, Mark Friedman, and today I have a very special guest. Fayez Mohamood is co-founder and CEO of Bluecore. Bluecore is an AI-driven retail marketing platform that brings together website, customer, and live product insights to match customers with the products they love. By activating dynamic product data for the first time, Bluecore's marketing solution solves the missing piece of the performance puzzle: the ability to respond to customer behaviors with triggered and individualized communication. I've known and worked with Fayez for about 7 years, and I'm very happy to have him join us today. Welcome to the Marketing Playbook.
Thank you, Mark. Excited to be here.
So maybe to get started here, it's always nice to give the backstory for people. Tell me about the story of your upbringing and kind of how it played a role into the position you have today at Bluecore.
Happy to. So I grew up in Doha, Qatar, in the Middle East. My parents are from India, and they moved to Qatar. They moved to Qatar probably in the 70s, and I was born and raised there, and so were my brothers. So went to school there, was there up until I was 19 years, and then ended up deciding to move to the US for college when I decided to study engineering. So that's how I got here. That was back in 1999, and been here for a very quick, transformative 20 years since then. I would say it's interesting because when I moved here, the goal always was to just study engineering and work at a big company. If you're born in a South Asian family, typically a lot of us think about getting into medicine or getting into engineering, chose engineering because didn't like the idea of being a doctor at the time, which is all about what I thought you could do with medicine at the time. So, engineering was a great place to learn and build a career, but that experience obviously led to a passion for building things, whether it's technology or companies, which is what I do today at Bluecore.
Right. And when you came to the U.S., where did you go to school?
I first moved to New Jersey and went to a school called New Jersey Institute of Technology, which is also where I happened to meet one of my co-founders, Mohamood, who ironically has the same first name as my last name.
Funny. NJIT, we used to kiddingly call it NJIT. It's a great school for engineering. How did you settle on New Jersey, of all places in the U.S., New Jersey?
It was not a very scientific process. In '99, we didn't have online applications. We were about 6 months away from getting our first connection to the internet. So my dad got us a catalog. There's this catalog of American colleges, probably doesn't exist today. It's this 2,000-page book with a list of universities in there and sort of how good they were at certain programs, like were you 4 to 5 in electrical and computer engineering versus something else. So I remember looking through that, and there were 2 decisions that went into it. One was, what could we afford, because moving abroad to go to university is very expensive. And then my older brother was moving to New York City at the time. He went to college upstate in Rochester, and pretty much did a triangulation of a university we could afford that was also within public transportation's reach when it came to getting into New York City. That was pretty much it. And that's how I ended up at NJIT.
That's funny. That college book you're referring to that dates me as well. The old Barron's book. You know, you had every college in the United States and even elsewhere, and you just started leafing through it. And if you didn't know where you wanted to go, you opened up and you put your finger down and said, "Yep, maybe I'll go there." So I know that book well. So you're an engineer by training. So you get out of school with your degree, and then what happens?
So I got out of undergrad in 2004, and I was really interested in hardware design at the time, especially designing microprocessors. And in order to specialize in that field, needed more than an undergraduate degree at the time. So I decided to go to graduate school at Georgia Tech to pursue my passion, and that was, 2 years to get my master's degree. After which I ended up moving to Boston to work at AMD, the chip maker, which is where I learned a lot of my fundamentals and engineering and things like big data that actually ended up becoming useful later at Bluecore.
All right. So as somebody that was interested in kind of the hardware side, how does that, how do you get from there to, now running and co-founding what basically is a marketing engine?
Yeah, it actually has closer connections than what might appear from the outside. So one of the things I did at AMD, where we were building microprocessors, designing microprocessors, was Microsoft and Electronic Arts and all these software companies would basically give us their software or what they would be building down the road, new games, new operating systems. And I worked on a team called the performance modeling team, and we basically had to simulate what a system could do and how it would perform. In order to do that, we had to analyze really large amounts of data. This was even before the term big data was coined, to actually figure out what happens when you run this next generation game on a next generation yet to be designed system. And you would have to crunch through terabytes and terabytes of data and days of simulation to simulate what would be essentially a few seconds on a new microprocessor. So that experience actually has a lot to do with what we do in marketing today, which is understanding large amounts of consumer data that comes in from very different sources, whether it's mobile, whether it's website, what's happening in stores, and then essentially predicting what products customers will be interested in. Who's likely to engage, who's likely to be your most profitable versus your least profitable customer. There are a lot of the same sort of basic concepts applied in very, very different ways. So that was probably one aspect of it. The second aspect of it was one of my co-founders at the time, who happened to be in Boston at the time as well. Him and I saw, Apple introduce the iPhone. That was back in 2007, 2008, and they opened up the developer platform. And sort of this notion of consumer engagement on mobile started to become a thing as well. So we had an app in the early days. We saw social games sort of come up on Facebook, and games had to get really, really good at engagement and analyzing large amounts of data. So a lot of the thinking behind how to use data to drive relevance and engagement came from both of those experiences.
Really interesting. So, as you, decided that maybe there was a void or something in the market that didn't exist, how did you hook up with the two co-founders? What was it about each of your respective core competencies, let's say, that, you sat there and said, geez, the three of us will make a good team?
So there were a couple of steps in between the time in Boston and starting Bluecore, and each of us had our own sort of journey through it. I ended up moving to Seattle to join a company in the gamification space. If you remember, gamification loyalty was really hot back in 2010, 2011. Again, the idea was, how could you take a lot of these mechanics that games had really developed and use that to drive engagement on brands. And I was working at one company where, we had clients like the NFL, Starbucks, CBS, and so forth. But it was really, really hard to integrate the data. So that was sort of one experience. One of my co-founders, Mohamood, ended up working at an e-commerce company in New York called Moda Operandi, and it was all about how to use data to determine tastes of folks that were into high-end fashion. And then we ended up moving to New York and met Max, who came from a very different background at Goldman Sachs, sort of with a finance background. And both Mohamood and I had a technology background, no finance, no business backgrounds. But that's pretty much how the three of us decided to connect and go deep on building Bluecore, which at the time was called Trigger Mail.
Right. And so you get together and you're what was the, kind of the premise or the hypothesis that, you felt you had some experience, you had some thought processes. What were you trying to solve for with Bluecore?
So at the time, this was 2013, the year we were founded. There were a few standalone companies in the email marketing space. Exact Target was one, Responses was another, Neolane was another. You had Mailchimp. The term marketing cloud hadn't been coined yet, but this was sort of the first generation of digital, where you had these systems that were built to send one message to millions of or tens of millions of people. And the world was changing pretty dramatically with the rise of digital and commerce, where you needed to start thinking about how to analyze data about customers to send different messages to different people, which from a technology perspective was a very, very different problem than what these legacy companies had set out to solve. So we knew that there was a gap, and that gap was, we understood that gap by talking to potential customers that were brands that were experiencing that gap and couldn't drive either the engagement, which they needed, or the revenue performance, which they saw was declining from sort of these broadcast type of messages. So when we double clicked into that, everything boiled down into how good could you be at ingesting and analyzing data at scale? And that was the insight that led us into, well, to understand data, you really need to understand a domain and a vertical. And we understood very quickly that retail and digital commerce had its own nuances with how the product catalog behaved, how fast it moved, how did the attributes change, what happens when a product goes on sale versus not, versus a new product coming in and going out of stock. And we felt that if we made it possible to ingest and analyze that kind of data, then it would become the foundation upon which you could drive customer engagement. But we started with a very, very focused application, which was, hey, how do you make it easy to reduce abandonment and increase conversion? That was sort of the first application of that concept.
Right. And because it was the first application, did you find it challenging to, get in the door? I know when I first, started to interact with you guys, I hadn't heard of you. But then when I did talk to your folks, one of the people that worked on my team had made contact with somebody at a conference. You had already had 300 clients. So I don't know where I was, but you were starting to build a business. Did you have trouble getting in the door to try and communicate to people, this is what we're going to be able to do for you?
Yes, absolutely, in probably at least half of the cases. So generally speaking, from where the market stood at that point, a lot of brands looked at us and thought, oh, interesting, trigger mail. Yes, I know what it does, but it sounds like a feature, right? It's a feature inside of a bigger product like a marketing cloud. And that was true if you thought that the potential of real-time messaging was, maybe 1 or 2% of your email volume, message volume, and less than 10% of your revenue. Now that was about to change because the amount of consumer behavior, first-party data that was increasing would basically change the ratio of automated behavioral messaging versus sort of the broadcast messaging. So there were folks who thought that the existing system would do a good job, where it was hard to communicate the value proposition. On the other hand, there were the early adopters, right? If you go by Jeffrey Moore's crossing the chasm concept, that knew that the next generation of messaging would be extremely difficult to do on incumbent systems. And they were looking for sort of the best of breed solution. And we got really good traction fast with amazing brands through that. So once we understood that, we started focusing on who had the pain point, who had sort of the most hanging on the table in terms of them being able to drive business impact through our product. And once we focused on that, things started to pick up pretty quickly.
Yeah, how did you guys fund your business initially?
We decided for the first 6 months to bootstrap with, both Mahmoud, Max, and I had worked for a few years, and we said, "Hey, let's see how this thing goes for 6 months based on the savings we had in the bank at the time." And then we joined an incubator program called TechStars in 2013, and within 3 months, we ended up getting a seed round of funding. At the time, that was led by First Mark Capital, that's based in New York. They've invested in a lot of great companies like Shopify and Envision, and they have a thesis with direct-to-consumer businesses as well, businesses like Brooklinen. And so they ended up investing in us and have followed in every round since then.
That's great. Sometimes the bootstrap is oftentimes the way that these businesses get started. Now you've got a business, you've got a concept. I hear very often from providers, we don't really know who to sell into depending upon the particular business. You could be selling into the marketing teams, you could be selling into the IT teams. How does a business like yours kind of get the lay of the land and know where best to sell?
Yeah, this has definitely evolved over the years. But at the end of the day, we like to say that a solution or a product actually has no inherent value unless it solves a business problem. And in our case, the business problem is almost always owned by either the marketing team or, in some cases, a CRM team. They're the ones who have onus for driving relevance, driving personalization, driving ultimately revenue and repeat purchase rates. And the technology teams are a big part of enabling it, but they usually have different business goals that they're driving after. So it's almost always the marketing teams that we are entering the conversation with because they have the business problem and the value. Even when we sell advanced use cases using artificial intelligence and predictive analytics, it may involve a lot of conversations with the data science teams and the analytics teams, but ultimately we're doing all of this to drive the business, and marketing has the onus for acquiring and retaining customers, and we help mostly with retention and a little bit of acquisition, both within that marketing domain.
Right, and that's helpful. And as time has progressed, with the business, and you started to build more tools out for marketers, which I'd like to elaborate on in a bit. But when you start to look at from the very beginning, you were deploying emails for companies through these triggers, but you were not viewing yourself, I believe, from my perspective, as an email service provider. Is that fair to say?
Yes, that's totally fair to say. And even today, there's the notion of what an email service provider is that's being very quickly redefined by sort of the infrastructure level sending players like a SendGrid and a SparkPost, for example.
Right. So if then go back to the beginning, so you didn't look at yourself as an email service provider, and not speaking at a school. I think that my understanding of that whole relationship is you needed to rely to some degree on good, strong relationships, not competitive relationships with the more traditional email service providers. And although I'm sure you still have those great relationships, you have evolved your business, and you're now offering those services to customers, correct?
That is correct. In very close relationship, in some cases with a SendGrid or a SparkPost, and in other cases, if we coexist with one of the bigger marketing clouds. But you're absolutely right.
Right. And one of the challenges that I had faced, as much as we liked the product, was the interaction with whomever we were using as the ESP. Doing work in Bluecore, especially on predictive, and I'd like you to talk about that. And then getting that information, into our ESP, and making it work kind of fluently. Are those challenges fewer and far between now as you become a more not substantial, but a more mature product?
Yes, absolutely. And at the end of the day, it's whatever the brands and the customers wanted when we look at what folks were asking us for. And then the second piece is what's happening in the in the traditional ESP market is that there's a set of capabilities that used to exist in a few different systems that are now starting to converge. One way we like to look at it is the notion of audience management versus campaign management and execution. And those used to historically be considered very, very different capabilities. They had their own, Gartner quadrants and so forth. But with the ability for us to bring data together, analyze it really quickly, and then execute campaigns really fast, our point of view is that they should really be one system, right? So it was less about who becomes the ESP, which, from a pure message sending perspective, we work very closely with the SendGrid in order to be able to do that. But all of the intelligence and the workflows and the predictions and the ability to segment and react in real time to these messages needed to happen in a system, in a next generation system like Bluecore. So that was the insight that led us to say, hey, this is what customers are asking for in order to drive performance and not drive volume. So that was one part of it. The second part of it is, if you think about the business model, this is probably where it comes to head the most. All of the last generation providers get compensated the more messages you send. So fundamentally, the more messages you send, what allows you to send more messages is the less relevant you are, right? Because conversions are lower, and then you got to send more to make up the difference. So we also felt that building on top of systems that get incentivized for sending more is not going to ultimately drive the best performance for the brand and the consumer, which was the other reason why we decided to go into that. So it was less about, hey, let's become a full stack ESP, and more about how do we drive more performance and relevance and be incentivized to the consumer and the brand.
Right. And so again, progression of your business and service offerings. We spent a bunch of time using your predictive capability. So talk a little bit about predictive, how to create, how you're creating or helping retailers create audiences, be more relevant, and then love to hear about some of the more recent introductions of products that you've put out to the market.
Yes, absolutely. So when we look at our product strategy, we look at it from the lens of what investments can we make that are going to drive relevance and performance. And that performance comes in the form of a few business outcomes. It's not just revenue at the top, because you could argue that there's different ways to measure that and who gets credit on the system for driving revenue based on where you are in the consumer interaction process. The second are business outcomes, like how many repeat purchases do you get? How many customers that are at risk did we re-engage, and so forth. So when it comes to answering those types of questions, the data that we collect, which is all first-party opt-in data from consumers around what products are they engaging with, what is the lifetime value of a customer, and how can you use that to make sure that they stay on your customer list for a long time. All of those present opportunities for machine learning and predictive analytics to help drive outcomes on in the form of audiences and campaigns. So because we are focused purely on brands that are going direct to consumer, both traditional brand and next generation brands, we can now focus very deeply on retail specific predictive models, things that predict churn, lifetime value, category affinity, offer and discount affinity, and so forth, and make it easy for marketers to basically try out different types of models in their audiences and campaigns. So that's been great. And again, our philosophy is not that our model is better than another model that might exist out there. It's to reduce the barrier to testing and learning as quickly as possible in order to drive the best performance. So that's worked great. About over 60% of our customers now use some sort of at least one or more predictive sort of audience filters to run their campaigns, which is awesome. So that was one aspect of it. The next part of it was thinking through, well, what happens when somebody clicks on a message through email? Where do they land? Well, they land on a website. If you don't optimize that path for conversion, you're leaving both relevance and conversion on the table, which is why we introduced Bluecore Site that allows brands to continue the optimization process through the website as well.
Yeah, and so Bluecore site, that's a new product. Can you talk about, perhaps an example of a client that that started with triggers, was doing some predictive, and is now gone to helping to optimize the site with that new product, and the benefits that they're seeing.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I was looking at one of our earliest customers that started first on triggers, then moved on to Bluecore as a full stack messaging and communications platform through Bluecore Communicate, which is our full ESP product. And then they decided to opt into Bluecore Site, which increased their list capture by about 15 to 20%, and also now started driving conversions through the recommendations we're powering on the website. One of the things that Bluecore does in email is determine what is the next best purchase for an individual customer based on both predictive characteristics we know from what we've collected and based on what's trending on the website. And now we can power that same sort of module on the website as well. So that's one example today. About 25 customers use Bluecore site within about a year of it being introduced in market, and we work today with about 400 brands. So that's a tremendous amount of growth while we're still in the early days with it.
And are you seeing anything that would help marketers? I know in the businesses that I've been involved with and the ones that I'm consulting with, we're continuing to see this, organically, increase in in traffic to mobile devices. Most of us are not doing anything necessarily to move the traffic there; it's just happening. And also on the mobile device, generally speaking, you see a much lower conversion rate than on desktop. Oftentimes, you see a lower average order, especially for those businesses that have high units per order. So, is Bluecore in any way specifically helping those businesses with their mobile channel?
So today we make it possible, as easy as possible, to collect mobile data when it comes to all the things that you mentioned. So that's sort of the first part of it. The second part of it is email has proven to be remarkably adaptable. And a lot of us like to think of it as this channel that exists outside of your mobile channels. But when you're on your phone and you see that email that is right next to your SMS, that is right next to your push notification, in that list, like, is it really an email? Is it a mobile notification? As far as the consumer is concerned, it's another entry point into engaging with your brand. So that's one way we sort of naturally help. In other ways, we want to be best in class at audience management and email campaign management, and we're looking to partner with folks that have done a tremendous job on the mobile side as of now. The other thing you mentioned, even though conversions and average order values might be lower, my hypothesis is that that's going to continue to change because a lot of the payment gateway providers, Apple Pay and PayPal, are making it easier and easier to buy on mobile, which certainly has changed my behavior. I'm finding myself buying from many other brands that I historically didn't used to buy from, and not just Amazon, because the payments process was typically the biggest friction. And when that continues to go away, I think we're going to start to see more and more metrics improve on mobile.
Interesting. That's certainly the payment gateways do make it a little bit simpler. So that's really helpful. There's so many, if we can use the term, retail marketing platforms, throughout Martech and ad tech. So when you think about the others that are out there, you may or may not compete with them head to head, but certainly you compete with them in the purview of the marketer and the IT people in a team, because there's only so many things I could assimilate as a marketer at any moment in time. I have Bluecore coming at me. I have 100 other emails and phone calls. So who else do you watch in the Martech and ad tech space as really starting to percolate and help brands?
Yeah, I think two parts to that question. One is, retail marketing and marketing tech may seem crowded, but the reality is that software as a service as an industry is very, very crowded and growing extremely fast, right? So we may think that there's, 5 or 7,000 companies in the space, but the reality is that, the market is owned by, you know, 20, 30, sometimes 40-year-old technology companies that, are running on-premise software that are not built for a data first world. And if you're a retailer or a brand, you really need to be thinking about, you know what is the absolute truth is that the next generation of digital is not going to be powered by those incumbents that were built back then, right? So then the question becomes, well, who do you bet on as your sort of next generation foundational piece of technology? And our point of view is that there's not going to be one system that owns it all, which is what a lot of marketing technology companies preach. But there's going to be best of breed applications that allow you to quickly drive business outcomes at the speed and pace at which your business moves. So that's how we think about it. I think there's companies that come to mind are folks like Braze in New York that's doing really, really well in terms of next generation tech. They have a strong DNA in mobile. Movable Ink comes up. They've done a phenomenal job starting with email, now optimizing into other channels. But I personally don't view it as like one winner taking it all. It's early days at this point.
The devil's in the details. You've probably heard that phrase time and time again in your professional life. Projects get started with great intentions, but you no longer have the time to pay attention to the little things that can make the difference between success and failure. At Details Interactive, you can discuss your business with a seasoned direct-to-consumer marketing executive who has helped launch and grow web businesses and integrate multi-channel marketing initiatives. Learn more at detailsinteractive.com. And the marketing clouds, that are out there, there's some prominent ones, Adobe and Salesforce, for example. Do you see yourself ultimately fitting well with them as, long term, or are you just, they're so, I don't want to say old school, but they are from the old school and you're from not the old school?
Yeah, I think we think about less about fitting with them than, how are we going to fit in with our customers, right? Because ultimately, I think that's what's going to determine who wins and prevails in the long run. And then the way we think about it, again, going back to the premise on performance is, do these systems have an incentive, these marketing clouds, to drive performance and relevance? In a lot of cases, it's not the case. It's kind of, similar to the first sort of evolution of software as a service, right? When Salesforce came about and said, hey, I'm going to reinvent customer relationship management software, and you don't have to buy on-premise software. You can sign up and you can sort of pay as you go and get quick value out of it. We find that in an intelligence and AI-driven world, performance-based businesses will win in the long run. And if we believe that that's true, it's less about the technology and more about how do these companies shift to that mindset, and will they have to completely retool their technology in order to get there? And most of these companies have been pieced together through acquisitions and systems that were originally never built to work with each other, right? And they've made a lot of progress in some cases integrating them well, in a lot of cases not. It's a hard question to answer. So ultimately, the easier question to answer is, how do we make brands perform, right, and make customers successful? And if we continue to do that, and if we can objectively show that, we'll continue to win.
All right. Good segue to question about customers. I read an article that you wrote a while back where you said that before launching Bluecore, I wish I had known that my most skeptical, demanding customers would become our best advocates. And as I was reading it, I made myself a note here. Said, if I didn't know any better, I would have thought that you were describing me. Talk about your customers and how you do or you don't, I'm guessing you do, rely on their feedback to help you become a better company.
It's the most important thing. Going back to one of your earlier questions, which was, how do we find the right type of customers that actually care? And when we say care, it's not care about Bluecore or the product. It's more about who cares the most about their business and their business outcomes. And we want to find ourselves attaching ourselves to those types of customers, whether it's people and how they think about being the change agents inside of their businesses, or brands that have a DNA to be forward thinking to begin with. And when they care, there's a business outcome that they're going after. And typically, those are the folks that are the most demanding and are going to be the ones challenging you the most. And when we deliver, there are also the biggest advocates, right? So I see the most challenging, demanding customers and advocates as different sides of the same coin. I think a lot of folks think of them as two separate things, and I don't. It couldn't be farther from the truth. The customers you hear from the least who are kind of okay with the status quo, they're probably okay with the status quo on a lot of things, and not the ones that'll move you forward. In terms of your second question, how do we take feedback? We have three places where we get feedback from. One, or input into our product strategy, rather. One is our customer success team that day in and day out works with a lot of our customers, and they're able to distill sort of the most common things that come from the field. That coupled with our product marketing teams that are always looking at where the market is headed and what are sort of the needs of the next generation of direct consumer retail. We have an advisory board of customers, both senior executives who have big business outcomes to go after, but also folks that operate the business day to day. We host a Bluecore summit every year where there's user groups and sessions where we not just hear what they say, which is one part of it, but observe what they need to accomplish. And then the third one, which is probably the hardest, is does that align with where we think the world will be in a few years, right? Because a lot of times the most straightforward requests are solutions to problems that may not exist a few years from now. And how do we reimagine a new way to do things that will be relevant down the road? And that's really what our product and technology teams focus on doing, to make sure that what we're building is here and relevant, at least for the next few years, with the pace at which things are changing. But listening to key customers is a big part of that, and especially in a business like ours where we focus on big enterprise customers. We work with hundreds of customers, not thousands or tens of thousands. Every opinion matters a lot.
Right. So the other side of it, of having, good customers, is having a great team. And I've been very fortunate because all of the folks, and this is not an understatement, all of the folks at Bluecore that I've been involved with, and it's at two different stops in my career, have been outstanding to work with. So kudos to you guys for that. But how do you hire? In New York City, which is where you're based, the competition for good technologists is pretty fierce. Customer service managers and the customer success managers and all the other roles. How do you hire? What's your involvement in hiring? Give us some flavor.
Yeah, it's top of mind for everybody who's got a lot of growth to do, and it's actually more similar to finding the early adopter customers than anything else, because you're not coming to a high growth earlier stage company, even though we're not as early as when we met back in the day, to have it easy, right? There's never enough time, there's never enough resources. Customers always want more than you can provide. And the trade-off for that kind of sacrifice is that you grow faster, right? You may get several gray hairs or lose some hairs in the process, like me, but you get growth in exchange for that, right? So number one is, are folks geared up to do that? Right now, we have the benefit of having balance. At times, especially working in retail, that can be hard, but you want to have to grow. That's number one. Second is you have to be coachable in terms of always wanting to learn, as opposed to wanting to know or wanting to be the best, the smartest person in the room. So that goes a lot into our hiring profile. And then the third is you have to believe in winning with the team. And that may sound like cliche, but literally winning with the team in terms of business outcomes and the equity you have in the company, right? Because ultimately that's how everyone gets rewarded financially in the long run, as opposed to near-term compensation, which is where a lot of the bigger companies focus on. So just like finding that ideal customer profile, it changes based on the stage of the company, but those three traits pretty much hold true up until the time we go public and start operating at a much bigger scale than we are today.
Going public. Okay, you heard it here, folks. First, folks, that you going public. You're the CEO. What's your job? How do we can look at titles, but what do you do on a day-to-day basis to move your company forward?
Changes probably every 6 to 9 months based on the phase of the company. I'd say at this point, it is one, making sure that our vision is up to date and accurate and everybody knows where we're headed. That's one. Second is making sure that we have the financial resources to go and accomplish what we need to do. We are a venture-backed company. We've grown extremely fast, and right now we have a sizable customer base that is financing our growth. But we also have investors that are doing it. So thinking about how much do we invest and how fast do we grow is always top of mind. And recruiting and retaining folks, going back to hiring people, right? Thinking through, if folks are coming here to grow at a pace that is faster than going somewhere else, then I need to make sure that we're delivering on it, right? So how are we thinking through development programs? How are we thinking through, compensation, equity philosophy, things of that nature, to make sure that people can do what they do best, and we're rewarding them for it, mainly in terms of development.
Well, your story is fascinating. You're a fascinating guy, and I appreciate you joining me today. In the podcast show here, as we get to the end, I do a 2-minute drill, kind of keeping with the theme of the playbook. I have a bunch of questions, just quick answers if you would be willing to. Okay.
Sure.
All right. So, a brand that you admire or that inspires you.
Nike.
Favorite app on your phone.
Calm, because I just got into meditation.
Okay, I've heard that one before. I might have to try that one out. The last website other than Amazon that you shopped from.
Colombia.
Something that you're not good at, but that you wish that you were.
It's a long list, but I would say giving appropriate recognition as fast as I can. When somebody does great work, I focus on the next thing.
Charitable organization that you're passionate about.
I work with the Organization of Rare Diseases, which is not a charitable foundation, but it's dedicated towards giving back to folks that have rare diseases, because my brother had one.
Okay, thank you. And then last one, if you had one superpower, what would it be?
Oh, to read what's on people's mind, because I often get it wrong.
Okay. How does that work with your wife?
Won't answer that question.
So this was great. Tell our listeners where they could reach out to you on social media if you're cool with that.
Yes, absolutely. My name is pronounced like fries without the R, so you can find me on Twitter at sideoffeyes.com, or sideoffeyes as the handle. I mean,
That's fun. No, I got. So anyway, this was great, Fayez. Thank you very much for doing this. Continued success to you and all the folks at Bluecore, and look forward to seeing you soon.
Awesome. Thank you, Mark. This was a lot of fun. Appreciate you having me on this.
All right. Take care. See you soon. That's it. Today's game ball goes to Fayez Mohamood for coming on the Marketing Playbook. To me, today's 3 game-winning marketing plays were as follows. So many of the basic concepts of managing your customers, who are the best ones you have, and how to speak with them to drive more revenue, were created years ago through the direct mail business. They're not new concepts. We don't have to recreate the wheel. Choose the metrics that are most important to your business, create tactics that will help you achieve those goals, and put tools in place to help you measure your performance. Number 2, sophisticated analytical tools like Bluecore are helpful, but only if the user company buys it with a clear understanding of the needs that will develop once you have it in place. You'll need someone internally to own it and to be able to create new content and messaging to support the findings that you'll have. New tools create new work, and strangely, some brands do not prepare for this fact. And number 3, whether it be your own position or your relationship with your providers, don't be afraid to initiate change and to challenge those providers, your colleagues, and yourself. Demonstrate a willingness to listen and to learn, and continuously look for ways to improve both your soft and technical skills. You need to be geared up to grow, you have to be coachable, but you don't have to be the smartest person in the room to be successful. You have to want to win with the team. Thank you, Playbook marketers, for listening to another episode. If you want to check out more pages of the Marketing Playbook, make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast spot and leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. You can also follow us on Twitter at DetailsInteract and learn more at detailsinteractive.com. Until next time, the devil is in the details.